Hello everybody and welcome to our webinar on managing worrying thoughts. So we're delighted to have Michael Ryan back with us today. So what I'm going to do now is hand you over to Mike.
Thank you very much, Fiona. We'll look at some slides over the next while. Just, I suppose, about worry in general, because whether it's for somebody with autism or not, the management of worrying thoughts are the same really for everybody. As we go down through this, one of the things about this COVID-19 is for all of us, you know, on the right hand side there, it's I suppose what the picture of order looks like. And on the left hand side is a little bit about what life might feel like just now, because everything is out of order, it's out of our routine, it's out of the normal way that things are. And in a way, we've had to adjust and adapt to how to exist within this disordered way of living, because nothing is quite as it used to be. The kind of nature, the unique nature of the worries during the coronavirus times, of course, is this layer of worry, which, you know, the virus, bottom is there, the kind of illness piece. I think we covered this in the last one as well, but it's just interesting to remind ourselves just of the kind of layering of worries that we have. So we're worried about the actual virus itself. We're worried about how that's going to impact the economy. We're going to talk a little bit about exam stuff later on. Our daily routine is disordered, or there's an unpredictable nature to this. We and our families are all worried, and we're worried about maybe elderly people. And in generally, we're kind of feeling unsafe. And these are really only just the list of things that are to do with COVID-19, on top of all the usual life's worries that we have apart from that, you know. So it's this kind of layering of worries that's challenging. And of course, it leaves us all stressed and afraid and frightened. And so I'm going to go down through a few tips and hints over the next little while. And I'm also very conscious that not everything works for everyone, and everyone deals with things differently. And I was giving a talk the other day on Zoom to another group, and I said, you know, so what would you hope to get from these series of talks? It was about managing your mental health. And somebody says, well, as long as you don't start banging on about deep breathing and mindfulness and coloring books and everything. And of course, I probably did have a few slides like that laid on down the line, and I was like, oh God, where are those slides? So I'll go through some strategies, and you'll know instinctively yourself what ones might work for you. We need to remind ourselves too that we actually have dealt with a lot of change over the past while. We have come to learn all of these different terms. We have come to deal with a whole ton of different things to do specifically with COVID-19. And we have all kinds of things there. So even just to look at that list, there's an extraordinary amount of stuff that we have already dealt with. And we need to remind ourselves that we are dealing with this. We need also to remind ourselves that you've survived 100% of the worst days of your life so far, and this too shall pass. An interesting statistic is about 8% of what we worry about is worth worrying about. We have about 60,000 thoughts every day, and an awful lot of them are to do with worrying stuff. And ultimately, worrying will never change the outcome. So we have to try and change our thoughts. So if you change your thought, you change the feeling and the worry, which will change how you feel inside, and then it'll change your behavior. So the behavior might be that you're not sleeping or something like that. So as you go down through these next few slides, what I'd ask you to do is then try and examine your thoughts afterwards. And what that'll do is it'll change the fears, and it'll change the worries, and everything else will change after that. We do have a negative bias in our brains, and the negative bias is down here in the bottom part of our brain. So the negative bias has some merit. The only problem is, in times of crisis, it goes into overdrive to try and think of all of the things that can go wrong. We try and remember, if you remember this statement here, my life has been full of terrible misfortunes, most of which never happened, from Michel de Montaigne. And really, you know, he obviously was a chronic worrier, and he would worry about all of those things, most of which never happened, of course. But then you live in this constant state of fear about things that aren't worth worrying about. It's in the bottom part of our brain here where we worry about these things, and it's kind of this survival mode. And that was quite important maybe back thousands of years ago when there was so many different kind of threats to our life and we needed to constantly be vigilant, but that isn't the case now. But that bit of our brain has still kind of remained strong. So what we need to try and do is move from the bottom part of our brain up to the more logical, the neocortex as it's called here, but up to the more logical kind of frontal part of our brains, which deal with logic. And that will help us to get out of this kind of panic-stricken mode that kind of keeps us in this cycle of fear, and up to the more logical part of our brain to say, well, actually, you know what, that's really not worth worrying about. And even if that did happen, I would be able to deal with it. So I'll deal with it if or when it happens. So one of the things I suggest you do is to make a list of the worries, so that you can externalize them. Because when we externalize them, what we do is we give our brains a different chance of processing our worry. If it's a thing that the worry goes round and round and round and round and round in your brain, it just stays there kind of on a loop, When you externalize it, say even if you write it out, the information comes back in through your eyes, your brain sees those worries down there, and it starts to work in a slightly different way than what happens if it just goes round and round in your brain. It's the same thing as if you're talking, to anybody, anyone that you trust, your therapists or parents or friends or whomever, that once you externalize it, you'll hear yourself talking about it, your ears will regurgitate that information, and they'll get starting to work away on how to deal with this worry, this situation. What I also recommend is that you take a specific time each day. So if you say you're going to sit down each day at 7 o'clock and look through your worries and write out your current list. As worries come through your mind during the day, then you say, it's okay, I'm going to deal with that at 7 o'clock. Now, what you might start to do is to worry that you'll forget about the worry by 7 o'clock. If you've forgotten about the worry by 7 o'clock, it wasn't worth worrying about in the first place. So don't worry about that. So if you sit down each day at 7 o'clock, you'll then deal with them as they come up. Put them into two lists, productive and unproductive. The productive is the ones that you can do something about, and then try and do something about them. The unproductive ones are the broader ones, like what will happen if the restrictions are lifted? What will happen if I mean, that could be about anything, but those things are always really in the hands of experts and nothing that we can do about them. And so they're not worth worrying about. The only thing that you need to concern yourself about is stuff that you can control. So those lists would be helpful. And then you contain the worries. It's a bit like the carton of milk, we say, without the structure around the milk goes everywhere. But when you put it in a carton, it's contained. And that's kind of what we're doing here about having a time every day, 7 o'clock or whatever suits you, maybe morning suits you better. And you say, I'll deal with the worries then. What happens is then you get out of the habit of constantly worrying, and you'll deal with it at a specific time. When you're doing your list, then break down each worry into manageable pieces and address them one by one so that you can see what you can take control of and place solutions in place for each bit of that worry. Another helpful thing is to ask, what's the worst that could happen? Because generally the worries go round and round and round, and we don't actually consider what is the worst outcome. And actually, if you consider this one, you'll realize that actually you can deal with the worst outcome that can happen. Because the reality of it is, whether it's about this COVID situation or whatever, we all live in a general fear towards around our health, and the fear of death and the fear of whether we get sick and all of that kind of stuff. But there's so many things that can happen to us in life. None of them are worth worrying about. Certainly COVID is not worth worrying about any more than any of the rest of them. And so you'll say, what's the worst that could happen? And you need to remind yourself that every day you take calculated risks just by leaving your house, whether it's getting into a car, taking public transport, or trying new things. So, you get into a car every day, and somewhere in Ireland, somebody's going to have a car crash today. That's just statistically the way it goes. I don't know, maybe there's a few of them every day. But statistically, you also think, well, I'm going to get into the car with a safe driver. Now, you don't think this consciously, but your brain has made this assessment for you. You say, I'm going to get into the car with a safe driver. We're going to stick within the speed limits. I'm going to wear my seatbelt. And so this is a worthwhile risk for me to take. And you've got to take the same approach then with COVID-19 or anything else. You wash your hands, you do your social distancing, and do all the stuff that we're told to do. And you've taken as many precautions as you can. And that's actually all you can do. The other thing about talking, by the way, is even if you're on your own, if you say your stuff out loud, it'll go back in through your ears. Your brain will process it in a different way rather than just rolling around your head. So don't worry about talking to yourself. It's perfectly healthy. And then remind yourself, of course, that things really turn out as bad as your fears are imagining them to be. So if you look back over the history of your entire career of worrying, you realize things rarely turn out to be as bad as you're imagining, whether that's exams or health issues. Using logic, this is what we were talking about earlier, just about using logics to scale the worries. So inevitably you'll say, oh my God, I'm terrified of, say, catching COVID-19, and it'll be up around level 9. But the reality of it is, and the statistics would show, that we have a really, really low chance of contracting that once you stick to the guidelines. So you need to take logic. So that 9 is because you're dealing out of the bottom part of your brain, the reptilian part, and we need to look at the logic part at the front. Now, what I also say is, thank your reptilian part of your brain for coming up with the worry. Just say, look, that's okay. I know you're trying to protect me. I know what you're trying to do is get me to think of all the things that can go wrong so that I'm prepared for them. But actually, I got this. And you work from this part of your brain. So rather than fight those worries, just thank your brain and say, thank you, I got this. We've got to hold on to hope, of course, because hope is what gets us through anything. So like I was saying before, you can change your thinking. So we need to look at what we were doing before. So if you can change your thoughts, it'll change your fears and worries, and it'll change how you physically react and then the behaviors that come to it. One of the challenges we have around a situation like COVID-19 is about our compassion for all of the people, say, who are in nursing homes, our compassion for the people of New York or Italy, our compassion for the people of England or anybody in Ireland who's going through this challenge and stress, or anybody who's contracted the virus. Because we have a kind of it's a human nature where we go, oh my God, I can't believe so much, and there's mass graves here, and there's terrible figures coming out of this place and that place, and the epicenter has moved and they still don't have the vaccine. We get all kinds of stressed about the pain and suffering that everyone else is going through. But the challenge is that actually there's nothing, our compassion has nowhere to go, and it gets stuck in your system then, because those things are happening in other places and possibly with other families, and they don't get any benefit from your compassion, you know. It's always helpful, you know, and depending on your age, where you are on this chart here, whether you're a young person who can create some place nice to go in your head, somewhere safe and somewhere happy to go in your head. Turning off notifications and unfriending kind of unhealthy groups is useful. So maybe choose who you have on your listening list and watch lists. If you can limit your exposure to the news to a couple of times a day, that would be great. Take a break from WhatsApp from time to time and limit your exposure to the news. Whenever you get into a kind of a real bind of worry, if you reset your system, it helps. So that usually comes in the form of some kind of exercise. A random act of kindness is a wonderful way to take back control, because if you start to focus your attention away from the negative and onto something positive, you regain control. And of course, the other person benefits. Another wonderful way of kind of breaking off from your worries and everything is creative expressions. So that can be anything. That's just another grounding exercise. Again, if we're overwhelmed, it's useful just to try and think of this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. Some people will just decide to stay in the comfort of their worries. So if you wish to continue to worry, become what we call a worried warrior. So do the necessary amount of worrying, but you also got to just keep going and be as productive as you can be. There's a couple of just specific mental health type supports there, and then there's other more COVID related kind of health related ones. So that's the presentation.
Thank you so much for that. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure, yeah. And thanks for inviting me along. And yeah, hopefully somebody got something out of it.
No problem. Thank you so much, Michael.
Not at all.
Okay,
Thanks,
bye
Fiona.
now.
Take care.